You're watching the Daily Climate Show here on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, a storm Barra hits the UK and Ireland, why we can expect more frequent extreme weather of all kinds in future. As MPs grill Alok Sharma on the results of COP26, how can countries be held to account on their climate target? And changing animal diets, could feeding cattle seaweed reduce methane emissions? Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, tens of thousands of homes are now without power in Ireland. Falling trees and flooding and more disruption is expected across the UK overnight. A storm Barra brings gale force winds in from the Atlantic. The latest named storm only comes 10 days after Storm Arwen, which left chaos across Scotland and northern England, where some people have only today had their electricity reconnected. Well, storms at this time of the year are common, of course, but climate change will bring more frequent examples of extreme weather of all kinds. We'll be hearing shortly from a leading climate scientist on how we can make the connection. But first, Enda Brady reports from South Wales.
Well, you join us here in Porthcawl, where Storm Barra has been battering the coastline of South Wales for hours now. Wind speeds of up to 62 miles per hour recorded here this evening. The worst of the storm is yet to come. It actually hit almost gale force 11 out at sea in the past couple of hours. Hasn't been as bad as people were expecting, but as I say, the worst of Barra is to come in the next few hours. Now, unbelievably, some people actually went out windsurfing in the storm here in Porthcawl earlier on. You can see those pictures now. They obviously knew what they were doing. They went out to sea and they got back in safely, but incredible to witness that earlier on here in Porthcawl. As I say, the worst of Storm Barra is on its way, and more, you know, we're seeing these storms. Last week it was Storm Arwen. This week Storm Barra, coming so quickly after such a disruptive storm last week, really testing people's resilience. But there has been no major loss of power in Wales today, no damage to property, and thankfully no injuries anywhere. So Storm Barra still blasting the coastline of South Wales, and climate scientists reckon that in years to come we are going to see more examples of extreme weather, storm after storm, and they say that is all because of climate change. But here in Wales, the town of Porthcawl bracing itself for a very, very stormy night.
Enda Brady there. Well, joining me now is Dr. Frederic Otto, who's climate scientist and co-founder of the World Weather Attribution Project. Thanks for joining us this evening. Now, the weather can't be attributed to climate change alone, can it?
No, every weather event has always multiple causes, and there's always a role to play of the chaotic variability of natural weather. But climate change can make extreme weather events more intense and more frequent.
So how does it work? How does the science of attribution work?
So the science of attribution is answering the question whether for a particular type of extreme event, say a storm like Barra, the climate change has made the event more likely and more frequent. And so a storm consists of several aspects. So one is the wind, and we don't actually see a big change in the wind's intensity and the frequency of heavy wind itself. But the other aspect of such storms that often leads to massive damages is heavy rainfall. And we do see a strong increase in heavy rainfall from storms associated with storms like Barra from climate change. And how we find out whether climate change plays a role is that we look at possible weather in today's climate using weather forecast models and compare it with possible weather in a world without the CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels.
Now, what's interesting is that the situation in Madagascar has been described by the WFP, which is the World Food Programme, as a climate change-induced famine. But you disagree with that?
It is important to realize that not all extreme events are made more likely and more intense because of climate change. So all heat waves are, many heavy rainfall events are, droughts in several parts of the world, but not in all. And what makes an extreme event, a catastrophe, is always hugely dependent on exposure and vulnerability. So who and what is in harm's way, were there warnings, and so on. And in Madagascar, in southern Madagascar, is an area that has very large natural variability. So there are always years which have good rainy seasons and years with bad rainy seasons, but the population is so poor and so dependent on good rainy seasons that even without climate change, a bad rainy season leads to huge food insecurity. And it's important to not blame everything on climate change, because that totally takes the agency away from local decision making and from, we can build resilience and we can adapt to today's climate. And also we can adapt to some changes in future climate that we absolutely see, and also in Madagascar, just not for these type of droughts, but for heat events.
Dr. Frederick Otto, thanks for your time this evening. Let's move on to some of today's other climate news now. Winter has arrived in Moscow as snow covers the city. Now, the last time the Russian capital had snowfall this heavy on 7th of December was 70 years ago, back in 1949, so more than 70 years ago. And more than 70,000 workers have been clearing snow all over the city, with the wintry weather due to continue overnight. And this year saw the 5th warmest November on record globally, according to the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service. Its monthly report found that the most of the North America, northeastern Canada and a large part of Siberia experienced temperatures well above average. Great Britain and Ireland hit near record autumn warmth. The UK government's been taken to court for promising to provide more than $1 billion funding to a liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique. Campaigners Friends of the Earth say that it's a climate-wrecking gas project, gas mega projects that could emit up to 4.4 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases over its lifetime. A spokesperson for the government says it does not comment on ongoing legal proceedings. The parts of the Glasgow Climate Pact agreed at the COP26 climate summit were historic, at least according to the Minister Alok Sharma. That was his message under questioning from MPs in a Common Select Committee this afternoon. It was his first appearance at the committee since the summit, and he emphasised how the agreement focused on the ability to measure how countries will reach the targets essential for tackling climate change. Well, I'm now joined by our climate change correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter. And Hannah, this was, of course, Alok Sharma's first... Hannah, there you are. This was, of course, Alok Sharma's first appearance since COP26 took place. You were watching it. What did you make of it?
It was very interesting, wasn't it, to see this critical public figure emerging as the face of climate change policy making, not just on the domestic front, but also internationally, be questioned really quite closely by a range of MPs, but particularly by the Green Party MP Caroline Lucas. And I guess the pressure on Alok Sharma, who presided over the Glasgow Climate Pact and drove that agreement over the line, is loosely falling into two buckets. And that's why he was being questioned at such length at this committee hearing. The first was on the international front, and he was asked over and over again on the central bit of the climate pact from the UK's point of view, and the US as well, which is he confident that individual nations will actually come back at the end of 2022 with better ambitions, with enhanced ambitions for reducing carbon emissions? From the UK's point of view, that was the critical element of the Glasgow Climate Pact. It's what ratchets up ambition. It's what makes hitting those net zero targets more and more likely. And Alok Sharma admitted that it is a big ask, and he has to do that because, you know, the EU and the US and others have started to say, well, it might be a real challenge. Alok Sharma also pressed on domestic agenda for the UK. So can he make good on promises to insulate homes and install heat pumps alongside the UK government, which is of course driving all of that policy side of things? And he admitted that there were some big challenges ahead. He acknowledged that the Climate Change Committee had told the government that there was some work to do on its policy agenda, but we are going to see more and more of this from Alok Sharma. He is increasingly emerging as the face of the battle against climate change for the UK government.
Hannah, thank you. Now, livestock accounts for around 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, much of that from cattle, who emit huge amounts of methane. Researchers in Ireland are looking into one solution, swapping traditional feed for seaweed.
Seaweed additives can reduce methane substantially in ruminants. A red seaweed has been shown to reduce methane by 80%. What we are trying to get to by 2030 is to actually reduce methane by 30% from ruminants. We're in a climate emergency. There is no doubt about that, and it's the most important thing for us to do in the ruminant sector.
Do stay with us because coming up after the break, I'll be joined by environmental campaigner and member of the House of Lords, Baroness Worthington, and Simon Lewis, who's Professor of Global Change Science at UCL. And we'll be discussing what we can do to adapt to more frequent extreme weather events and if it's time to cut back on Christmas excess for the sake of the planet.
April is the sixth turtle of the Marine Savers Flying Turtles programme. The Marine Savers programme in the Maldives rescues and rehabilitates turtles, but unfortunately they can't provide forever homes. So we've flown April over to Sea Life Lot Lowland up in Scotland, where we can replicate her natural habitat, and she'll live out the rest of her life here with us, with our expert animal care team. It's actually taken us 3 years to come to this stage in the project. There's various permits, the authorities, have stringent checks as to where she's going to be living long term. There's also health checks that need to be taken place. We flew over to the Maldives. We have to pack her up, put Vaseline on her, and as you can see on the video there, you can see her loaded onto the British Airways flight with the help of IAG Cargo. What happened was she was found back in April 2019, hence her name. She was found entangled in a ghost net, which is common in the Maldives. Unfortunately, fishermen throw the nets over the side of the boats. She was found entangled, and she already had front flipper amputated. And also, as a result of her injuries, she's got lung tears, so she's got buoyancy problems. So as you can see, she can't dive down, so she can't fend for herself in the wild, she can't feed. And it's very hot in the Maldives, obviously, with the sun. So because she can't dive down underwater, she's not protected from the elements. She's settling in really, really well. We've had to do a phased introduction because obviously it's a completely different environment for her. So it was a big change, a big journey. So we've been having her in quarantine part of the time, and then we've been introducing her gradually to a new home.
I love my job because I get to do something that is contributing to a better future.
Did you know if more of us walked, rode bikes and scooted to school, we would make a big difference to the air pollution around our school? Yeah, like us.
Storm Barra continues to bring some disruption. Wednesday morning will be windy for many, with severe coastal gales still possible in the southwest. There'll be plenty of showers around, some heavy and prolonged, with further winteriness on northern hills. It'll feel cold for most. The winds will ease across more of northern and central Britain later, but the showers will keep going into the evening. Looking at the UK's air pollution, the unsettled conditions will keep levels low, measuring just 2 or 3 on the daily air quality index.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to the discussion that's on climate issues of the day. The environmental campaigner and member of the House of Lords, Baroness Worthington, and also Simon Lewis, Professor of Global Change Science at UCL, will be speaking to them. Now, as we were hearing earlier in the programme, Storm Barra has been affecting communities across Ireland, Wales and the north of England. And as global warming continues to increase, the effects of climate change mean that extreme weather events are likely to become more frequent and, of course, intense in the future. So let me just come to you first, Bryony. I mean, we can't put every storm to climate change, but are we ready?
Hello. No, you're absolutely right. Winter storms have been with us for forever, really. But what we're going to be seeing in the future is much more intense and more frequent storms. And we really need to start getting better at predicting the severity of those storms so that we can then take action to try and make sure that we have the least damage and don't have any losses of life. We've got to get ready for what's in store ahead of us. And arguably, we're starting very late in that process. So it's really time we started to talk about this as a nation.
And Simon, this is the second storm to hit the UK in just the last few weeks. There are thousands of people still without power. Are we prepared to deal with their upsets? We don't seem to have the infrastructure in place.
Yes, it seems that we are not prepared for these kind of storms. And more generally, we're not very well prepared for the impacts of climate change. What the kind of simple equation is that we can either mitigate climate change, reduce emissions, adapt to those impacts, or suffer. And there seems to be a lot of suffering coming down the line because of a lack of reducing emissions and a lack of adaptation. There was a report by the statutory advisors to the government, the Committee on Climate Change, and they said that we were woefully inadequately prepared for climate impacts.
And Bryony, do you think that people are aware that we're going to be having more of these storms? And crucially, are they ready and prepared to deal with them? Do they know how to handle this?
I don't think we really are aware, and it's probably no surprise because we haven't actually had any public information broadcasting from the government on climate since the 2000s. And it's been sort of left to people to find out information as best they can. And I think obviously we've been a bit distracted in the last couple of years with another crisis, but that shouldn't really take our eye off the longer term threat that we need to get ready for this crisis. This is kind of waiting in the wings. It's not going to go away. The physics of climate change is really, you can't negotiate with it. So it's in store for us. And as you know, we really need to see the government take a lead in helping people understand those simple things like just thinking about your home and understanding how vulnerable you might be either to extreme heat in the summer or exposure to flooding or even just high winds, people have start to think about their homes as not being perhaps as safe as they once were and starting to prepare for it. We don't want to alarm anyone, but we also don't want to have people just, going into this with ignorance. We can prepare, and that will help to stop people from feeling the damaging effects.
Well, Simon, just going on what Bryony just said then, is our government too reactive? Do we only think about flood defences after we've had floods?
And it seems to be the case that we see an impact and only then start to think about it. And scientists have given ample warning of the kind of impacts of climate change, the heat waves, the heavy rainfall events, and we should really be moving fast to have a public information campaign, as Bryony says, to help the public understand the issues and what they can do about them. But crucially, we have this 10-point plan from the government about how to reduce emission, how it's going to reduce emissions, but we don't have an equivalent 10-point plan about how we're going to adapt to climate change and what the government is going to invest to make sure that our critical national infrastructure and our homes are resilient for what's coming in the 21st century.
OK, well, let's just move on to our next topic there. And there is a warning today that the price of traditional Christmas lunch ingredients is rising, with the cost of frozen turkey up 7%, for example, and Christmas puddings 5% more expensive than last year. Well, the festive season is typically a time of excess. We're all guilty of that, aren't we? But with a third of all food produced around the world being wasted each year and the cost of produce going up, is it time to cut back and how much we buy? Well, let me throw that one to you there, Simon. Do we need to start rethinking our approach to the festive season?
Well, it's a no-brainer that we shouldn't buy food and then throw it away, because it's a waste of money, and also it does have carbon climate change implications. But it's also a question about what we buy and therefore what we waste. For Christmas dinner, a kilo of beef would about 60 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent, whereas a turkey would be around 6 or 7 kilograms of CO2 for a kilo of turkey, whereas a nut roast would be about less than 1 kilo. So what we buy matters as well as what we waste. But perhaps those people who have excess money that they can buy food and throw it away should probably buy a bit less, maybe in the spirit of Christmas, donate that money.
Let's bring in Bryony, because as Simon sound. And Bryony, look, consumers are already paying for more, food prices going up, energy prices going up. Is it fair to put the responsibility of climate on our meals, especially around Christmas time?
I think there needs to be a big conversation about how we produce food and what that impact of that is on the planet. It's been a success story in many ways that we've kept food prices low. We've seen productivity of land grow, but it's come at a price, and that price has been loss of nature, but also we've contributed hugely to greenhouse gas emissions from the land use sector. So there is a definite need for a new conversation. We've had a bit of a tough couple of years, and I don't think anyone wants to be a killjoy in relation to the festive season, but being a bit more thoughtful about, purchasing is a good thing.
Thank you very much indeed. Bryony, Simon, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. Well, do stay tuned, because coming up next on Sky News Tonight, there are fears that Christmas could be cancelled after the UK records its highest number of weekly COVID cases since January. We'll have more coming up next. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Do have a lovely evening, whatever you're up to. Bye for now.